Hi there, today we're going to be working on some really old motorcycle parts. It's 113 years old. It's a 1912 Bradbury motorcycle. Bradbury Motorcycles started making motorcycles really early on. This motorbike was one of the first in the world to get variable gearing. Back in 1912 this was a real selling feature. Let's take a look at these parts. As you can see, some of them look like they're over 100 years old. Bradbury actually finished manufacturing motorcycles 101 years ago. Let's get these in the workshops and crack on getting the job done. Before it can go into the workshop, we have to book it in, which means listing out every part individually, which gives us a good chance to inspect them at the same time. We also take a picture. That gets printed out, and then both of those go together with the job in the workshop. Before we can do any prep work to these, we've got to remove all of the old plating so that we're back to bare metal. In order to do this, we're going to put them on copper wires. That way we can pass a current through them the opposite way to when we're plating. So we're actually going to plate the old plating off. That part hasn't got a hole in it, so we've got to make sure it's nice and tight on the wire. We don't want to be fishing it out of the bottom of the tank. Now these are going into the stripper tank. This is mainly sulfuric acid with some glycerine and water in it. We have to keep it at a specific density in order for it to strip nicely, else it will chew right into it. These parts going in the basket are actually reproduction parts and don't have any plating on them. What we've got to do is put them in the acid just to make sure that we remove any rust and also any mill scale from when the iron's been cast. These parts have been in here about half an hour and now they're ready to come out. A good swill. They need to go into the hydrochloric acid to pickle off any rust that's there, as the sulfuric doesn't remove the rust quickly. Now these are swilled off, you can see that they're rust free. This tank they're going in here is a hot soapy alkaline solution that prevents rust, so they won't go rusty while they're drying off. Almost forgot, we need to get that basket out. Now these are swilled off, they're going to go into the same hot soak. And hung up to dry with the rest. Now we're in the polishing shop. This is where most of the physical work gets carried out. This first operation we call cutting out because we're going to remove all of the marks. We're going to cut all those marks out
using abrasives. This is a 240 belt we're starting on because these aren't terribly rough. This is the fastest and most controlled way to remove metal, but it does need a skilled hand. We just have to work our way through methodically and remove all of the marks. The bouts only last so long, so here's a fresh bout. You saw us putting a little bit of grease on, that moderates the cut and just slows it down a bit. When I was a child, I used to watch my dad polishing if he took me to work with him, and I was always fascinated by the showers of sparks that came off the workpieces. You won't see any showers of sparks from this because this is made, by the looks of it, from a type of bronze. He's now putting a steel tube through it. This will speed things up because he can now spin it against the belt. All those parts have now finished with the cutting out part, and we're going to move on to some different tools. These are cotton stitch mops that have been dressed up with an abrasive, and they're a lot more flexible for getting into little corners and nooks and crannies that you struggle with an abrasive belt. Here's the abrasive that we're going to dress it up with. They don't last very long, so you need a bit of a pile of them. There it is, dressed up to be used again. Just needs to be put to one side to dry off for a little while. As with the linishing, it's just a case of working through all the parts methodically until you're done. And that's all the parts finished on the sateen mop. Now we're changing it for a sisal brush, and we're going to be getting these to a near mirror finish using polishing compounds. You may notice that he's actually leaning into the machine quite heavily when he's doing this brushing procedure. Before, when you're doing linishing and satining, you let the tool do the work, but when you're doing this with a brush, you've actually got to put a bit of physical effort in to get it to remove the marks. And there are the parts brushed up to a mirror finish so that they're ready for plating. One last little thing to do is to give them all a wipe down. We're doing this to remove any of the polishing compounds, or compo as we call it, because once that compo dries out, which it does on these hot parts, then it's very difficult to remove. So doing it at this stage is a lot easier. Now this part here needs a bit more attention. This here is going to have these really deep holes brazed up, because we can't build them up with copper, they're just way too deep. No. We've been asked by the customer to build up certain parts of that stem with copper because it's so corroded that the clamps don't clamp onto it. You don't really see much of it other than the elbow part, but there's some areas that we're going to need to build up, as you'll see later. But first things first, let's get this brazed up. The biggest problem is we've got to heat up what is essentially a massive heat sink, so it can take a while to get it to the right temperature. finally getting hot enough to melt the brazing rod. That's very hot, so let's cool that down. Now it's time to trim the excess brass off the top, and then we can finish polishing that. We're not having to go too fine because this is going to have a lot of copper on it. What we're doing here is we're taping off the areas that aren't corroded because we want to selectively build up the really bad rough areas. So we're going to put some metal back on, and that way the customer's clamps are actually going to be able to clamp it up solidly again. Hardly any of this part is seen, it's just to give it some thickness to clamp onto. All we're doing here is putting some wire on to make sure that that insulation tape doesn't unravel in the tank and cause problems. It's going through the same cleaning process that the rest of the parts are going to go through later. So it's a soapy clean, an electric clean, it will go through various rinse tanks. Here we're going into a cyanide copper tank. It's called cyanide copper because the solution to dissolve the copper is cyanide based. The reason for that is that you can't put steel direct into an acid copper solution, which is the high build one that we're going to go into in a moment. We've got to go through the rinse tanks again. And now we're into the acid copper, which will build this up. It's going to be cooking away in here for a few hours yet. Now we're into the plating shop. We're going to get all these wired up onto copper wires because it's called electroplating for a reason. We need to be able to pass an electrical current through it. It's important which way you hang the items up, and it's also imperative that everything gets a good electrical contact. The next thing is to make sure that these are perfectly clean. This tank is just hot soapy water. We've got to be really methodical and wipe each individual piece to remove any oil, grease, dirt, polishing compounds. These have got to be absolutely sparkling clean. Even with the dirt off them, there's another cleaning step. This is an electric cleaner. We're passing a current through it, and that's going to remove any oxide film that might have developed since they were polished. You can't be too careful, because even an invisible oxide film will prevent the plating from bonding properly to the surface. So this is now going through the counterflow rinse system, which is going from dirty water to progressively clean water. This one here is actually a dilute sulfuric acid, a bit like vinegar. That's to remove any trace of soap that might still be on it. And now we're into the nickel tank. The nickel tank is where it's going to get a nice deposit of nickel, and that's where all the good looks and the weather protection come from. Originally, in the 1920s, this would have been a different type of nickel. We've set the power, and it's time for this to cook away until it's finished. The pre-1930 nickel was what people call soft nickel, or it can be called polished dual nickel. It is actually more weather resistant than this one, but it's also more expensive, and the customer already has bright nickel, which is what this is, on his bike, so he wants to match what's already there. Bright nickel is what's put underneath a chrome finish. Time for these to drip dry. I bet you thought we'd forgotten about that copper piece we were building up. You can see how thickly it's gone on, and the edges are starting to build up like a Christmas tree. First of all, we're going to knock those bits off the edge. What we're doing is we're taking off the excess build-up in the copper. Anything that's plated with electroplating, electrolytic plating, always builds up on edges. They're what's known as a high current density area, and they pull more power, so they get more plating. You can see that the copper areas have built up to the same thickness as the steel areas. We're now using a sisal brush to actually polish this up. Now we've switched to a mop and we're going to give it its final shine. You'll see that the copper polishes to a mirror finish now. There we go, we've now got a usable stem. So it's time for this one to get wired up. It's going to go through all the steps you saw before. And there it is, finished with all the other parts. Now we've got to unwire all these parts so that they can be inspected. We just need to give them a good wipe over and remove any water stains from where we've swilled them. That way we can see that they're right and ready for the customer. And here's the finished article. Not bad for something that's 113 years old. And a reminder of what it looked like before. The pitting in it is because there's porosity in the casting. We can't do much to overcome that, and if we do, we would remove that Villiers stamping that's in it. If you would like your nickel or chrome work restored, please give us a call.